I was just a 24-year-old assistant at a small tech startup in downtown San Francisco, a city buzzing with ambition and innovation. My role was simple, or at least that's how I saw it: organizing files, fetching coffee, and making sure the office ran smoothly. There was nothing glamorous about my position, but it was mine, and I did it well enough. I wasn't the type to speak up much. In fact, I preferred to blend into the background. If there was a meeting, I made sure to stay quiet, taking notes, but never contributing to the discussion. It wasn't that I didn't have ideas, but I was too shy to voice them, worried that they wouldn't be good enough or that someone would dismiss me as just an assistant. I had always been the quiet one in school, the one who avoided the spotlight and tried to go unnoticed. Somehow, it felt easier that way. Being invisible in a sea of people was less daunting than trying to stand out. I thought that if I kept my head down and did my job without drawing attention, I would be safe. But that all changed on a Thursday morning in early spring, a day that seemed like any other, but would end up reshaping everything I thought I knew about myself and the world around me. The office was abuzz with energy. Everyone was gearing up for the launch of a new product, the kind of project that made everyone in the company feel like they were part of something big. People were running around, working long hours, juggling phone calls and deadlines. The lobby of our office building reflected that same frenetic energy. It was a place of constant movement, employees hurrying in and out, clients coming and going, delivery people dropping off packages. It was the heartbeat of the company, a microcosm of the business world outside. But today, amidst all that energy, there was one person who stood out to me. An elderly man, probably in his late 60s, was standing by the front desk, trying to get someone's attention. He was dressed in a neat gray suit, the kind you would wear to a formal event or a business meeting. It was well-tailored, and although it wasn't flashy, it had an air of quiet sophistication. He looked out of place in the chaotic lobby, his posture stiff and formal, as if he wasn't sure where he was or how to fit in. What really caught my attention, though, was the expression on his face. There was a hint of frustration mixed with confusion. I watched as he gestured toward the receptionist, trying to communicate, but no one seemed to understand him. It was clear that he was trying to explain something, but the receptionist, who was busy handling a stack of papers, couldn't make sense of what he was saying. And then I saw it. His hands were moving in a fluid, deliberate way. He was signing. I'd learned some sign language in college when I volunteered for a community service project, and my younger brother, Noah, who was deaf, had taught me some basics. I spent a lot of time with him growing up, learning how to communicate in a way that would help him navigate the world. So when I saw the man using sign language, something clicked inside me. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, just a natural urge to help. I had been in Noah's shoes before, feeling like people were looking right through me, not taking the time to understand. I hated that feeling, and I couldn't stand to see it happen to someone else. I wasn't sure if I could be of much help, but I knew that I had to try. At first, I hesitated. After all, I was just an assistant. My job was to handle the small stuff, not to step into situations that felt out of my depth. But as I watched the elderly man's shoulders slump in defeat, I realized I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. I gathered up every bit of courage I had and walked over to him. My heart was pounding and my palms were sweaty, but I smiled and signed, "Hello, my name is Emily. Can I help you?" His eyes widened, and for the first time since I'd noticed him, his face softened. A genuine smile spread across his features, and I could see the relief in his expression. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. He signed back, his hands moving with the grace and fluidity of someone who had been using sign language for years. "Oh, thank goodness," he signed. "I've been trying to communicate with everyone, but no one seems to understand me." He introduced himself as Victor Langford, a retired architect. He told me he had come to the office to see his daughter, who worked here as our head of product development. I could tell from the way he spoke about her that he was proud of her, though there was an underlying tone of sadness. As he spoke, I noticed how calm he seemed now, how much more at ease he was, simply because someone had taken the time to listen to him. I realized something in that moment. I wasn't just helping him with a simple request. I was giving him back a little of his dignity, something he had probably been missing all morning. "Would you like to sit down while I help you get in touch with her?" I asked. He nodded, and I led him to the seating area. As I picked up the phone to call his daughter, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something important. Here was a man who had designed parts of the city's skyline, someone who had achieved so much in his career, and yet here he was, being ignored and dismissed by the very people who should have shown him respect. It was a powerful reminder of how easily we overlook the people around us, how often we're too busy to really see them. Little did I know that helping Victor Langford that day would set off a chain of events that would not only change his life, but also mine. That one decision to step out of my comfort zone, to notice someone who had been overlooked, would lead me to a place I never imagined I'd be, stepping into a role I didn't feel qualified for, but was about to grow into. As I waited for the call to connect with Lila, I couldn't help but look at Victor. There was a quiet dignity about him that I hadn't expected. For someone who had been so visibly overlooked by the busy employees in the lobby, he carried himself with a calm and grace that seemed to make everything around him slow down. His posture, once rigid, was now more relaxed, and his eyes, which had earlier shown frustration, now looked peaceful. I couldn't help but wonder about his life, his career, and the things he must have seen and done in his years as an architect. As he shared his stories, it became clear that he wasn't just any man. He had designed some of the buildings that made up the iconic skyline of San Francisco, the kinds of places that people admired and took for granted every day. I found myself leaning in, fascinated by his stories. I had always thought of architecture as something rigid and technical, but Victor spoke of it with such passion. He told me how he'd worked on the designs for the Golden Gate Bridge Visitor Center, the Modern Art Museum downtown, and even a few of the skyscrapers that stood tall in the city. His love for architecture was palpable, and as I listened, I could sense the pride he took in his work. But there was something else, too. As he spoke of his career, there was a wistful undertone to his voice, as though those days were behind him, yet still a part of who he was. I realized that, despite the success he had achieved, something had been missing. It wasn't about the buildings he had designed. It was about the connections he hadn't made, the relationships he had lost along the way. I found myself wondering about his daughter, Lila. She was the reason he was here, after all. The way Victor spoke of her made it clear that she was the center of his world, yet there was a sadness in his words that told me he hadn't seen her much lately. I couldn't help but wonder if work had pulled them apart, the same way it had for me and my family. My relationship with Noah, my younger brother, had been strained over the years. The more I buried myself in my job, the more I distanced myself from him too. It wasn't intentional. It was just the way life seemed to go. But as I sat there, listening to Victor talk about Lila, I realized how much I had taken the people I loved for granted. I hadn't made the time for them, the way I should have. As I relayed the message to Victor that Lila was still in meetings, I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He tried to hide it, but I could tell that he had really hoped to see her today. He signed to me that he would probably come back another time, but there was a quiet resignation in his words. It was as if he had accepted that he would always be the one waiting for his daughter to find time for him, waiting for life to slow down long enough for them to reconnect. I was about to suggest that maybe he should just come back when I stopped myself. For some reason, I couldn't bear the thought of him leaving feeling invisible once again. I looked at him, and something inside me told me that I needed to do more than just offer him a seat and a phone call. I needed to give him something he hadn't had in a while, a chance to feel like he mattered, to feel like he was seen. "Victor," I said, feeling a surge of determination, "would you like to see the office? I can give you a tour while we wait for Lila. It'll give you a chance to see the place she works, and I think you'll enjoy it." Victor's face brightened a little at the suggestion. He signed, "I would like that very much. Thank you, Emily." And so, we started walking through the office. I showed him the open workspace where our developers were busy working on new code, the brainstorming rooms where we mapped out ideas for our latest projects, and the quiet lounge areas where employees took breaks between long hours. As we walked, I noticed something strange happening. I had always seen this office as just a place to work, a place where I did my job and went home at the end of the day. But now, as I showed Victor around, I began to see the office through new eyes. The walls weren't just white and sterile anymore. They were filled with creativity, passion, and ideas. This wasn't just a company, it was a place where people came together to build something bigger than themselves. Victor, for his part, was more engaged than I had expected. He asked questions about the work we were doing, and I could see his architectural mind at work as he admired the design of the office space itself. He commented on the layout, the way the natural light flowed through the windows, and the use of materials that made the space feel both modern and comfortable. It was clear that, despite stepping away from architecture years ago, his passion for design never really left him. As we continued the tour, I began to feel a sense of pride in the company I worked for. The work we were doing wasn't just about coding or developing a product. It was about creating something that could impact people's lives, something meaningful. Victor's interest in our work reminded me of why I had chosen this job in the first place, to be part of something innovative, to feel like I was contributing to something important. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't been fully appreciating it. I had been going through the motions, doing my job without really connecting with it. By the time we made it to the break room, I felt a sense of satisfaction, not just because I had shown Victor around, but because I had helped him feel seen. It wasn't a huge gesture, it wasn't a grand achievement, but I could tell that, for him, it meant something. It wasn't just about the office tour. It was about being treated with respect, about being made to feel like his presence mattered. We sat down to take a break in the lounge, and Victor signed to me, "I haven't seen my daughter in a while. I miss her." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of unspoken longing. It struck me then just how much he had sacrificed for his work, how much he had given up in the pursuit of success. And now, at this point in his life, he was trying to reconnect with the one person who mattered most to him, his daughter. Little did I know, this simple moment of connection would turn out to be the beginning of a much bigger change, not just for Victor, but for me as well. We sat in the break room, sipping coffee and talking about life, work, and the things that matter most. I could tell that Victor was starting to relax, the weight of his earlier disappointment easing as we talked. He was passionate about architecture, and every time he spoke about it, his eyes would light up. There was a certain magic in the way he described his work, even though he had long retired. But behind that passion, I could sense a lingering sadness, a longing to be closer to his daughter, Lila. As I listened to him, I couldn't help but think about my own family. The more I learned about Victor and his relationship with Lila, the more I realized how much I had taken my own relationships for granted. I hadn't seen Noah in weeks, busy with work and lost in my own thoughts. I always thought I had time, that there would be another day to call, another time to visit. But as Victor talked about his daughter, it became clear that time was fleeting, and we never knew when we might miss our chance to connect. When Lila's assistant finally called back to inform us that Lila was still unavailable, Victor tried to mask his disappointment. But it was hard to ignore the subtle way his shoulders slumped, the way he looked down at his hands for a moment before looking back up at me. "I should probably go," he signed, trying to sound casual. "I'll come back another time." I could tell he didn't really want to leave, but there was nothing he could do. Lila was busy, and he couldn't change that. I hated the thought of him walking away, feeling like he had been invisible all over again, like his presence didn't matter. I felt this unexpected surge of protectiveness for him. Maybe it was because of Noah, because I knew how it felt to be overlooked by the people who should care most. Or maybe it was just because I couldn't stand to see anyone, especially someone like Victor, feel like they didn't matter. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. "Victor," I said, my voice a little more confident than I felt, "I know you didn't come here to just sit around waiting for Lila, but while we're here, why don't I show you the rest of the office? We could take another tour, see a few more areas, talk a little more." Who knows? Maybe you'll learn something new about the company she works for, or maybe you'll just enjoy seeing the space again. We can grab lunch afterward if you're interested. I'm happy to spend more time with you. Victor raised an eyebrow, surprised by my offer. I wasn't sure what came over me, but something about the thought of him leaving again without truly connecting made me want to keep him here, even if it was just a little longer. I didn't know how much longer I would have to make a difference to help him feel seen. This wasn't just a tour of the office. It was a chance for me to help him feel important, to remind him that he wasn't just a visitor in a busy office. He was a person with a life, a story, a legacy that deserved to be acknowledged. Victor seemed to think for a moment before signing. "I'd like that very much, Emily. Thank you." And so we continued our little tour of the office. This time, as I walked him through the various departments, I found myself feeling proud of what we were doing here. I was part of something bigger than just my role as an assistant. I was part of a company that was changing the world, one product at a time. And as I showed Victor around, I realized that this wasn't just about the work we did, it was about the people we worked with, the connections we made, and the impact we had on each other's lives. Victor's interest in the work we were doing felt genuine. And as we talked, I realized how much we had in common. Despite being in different industries, there was a shared understanding of what it meant to create something meaningful, something that would stand the test of time. As we moved from room to room, Victor offered insight into how spaces could be designed more effectively, how the environment we worked in affected the work we did. He was still an architect at heart, even if he wasn't actively designing buildings anymore. We visited the marketing team, the design department, and even the product development area, where Lila worked. Each time I introduced Victor to a new person, he greeted them with a sense of respect that was hard to ignore. He didn't treat anyone like they were too busy to talk to him, like they were just another cog in the machine. He made people feel valued, even if they were just interns or junior associates. And as I watched him interact with my colleagues, I began to realize how much I had taken for granted about the people I worked with. We were all so caught up in our own tasks, our own deadlines, that we forgot to see the humanity in each other. By the time we reached the design studio, where some of the more creative work was done, I could tell that Victor was enjoying himself. He was asking questions, commenting on the work he saw, and truly engaging with the people around him. It was clear that he wasn't just here for the tour. He was here to connect, to understand, to find something meaningful in a place that had once been foreign to him. But as much as I enjoyed showing him around, I could sense that the clock was ticking. The feeling that he was just passing through, waiting for Lila to come down and finally acknowledge him, was starting to hang over us again. It was hard not to feel like the whole thing was a setup for disappointment. But before I could say anything else, I noticed Lila coming down the hall toward us. She was finally free. As Lila approached, I felt a wave of nervousness wash over me. I wasn't sure why. I'd been around her plenty of times, but today felt different. The dynamic between her and her father was palpable. Victor had been so excited to see her, and I knew that this moment, this reunion, meant everything to him. I could see it in his face, the mixture of anticipation and hesitation, like he wasn't sure how Lila would react after so much time apart. For all the stories he had shared about his pride in her, it was clear he was still waiting for her to acknowledge him, really acknowledge him, as her father. Lila walked toward us with her usual efficiency, her face set in that professional expression she always wore. She was dressed impeccably, her power suit and heels a sharp contrast to the casual, almost worn look of Victor's clothes. I could tell she hadn't expected to find us together. And her eyes flickered with surprise as she saw me standing there with her father. "Victor," she said, her voice soft but with a hint of surprise. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze flicking between him and me. It was almost as if she didn't know how to navigate this situation, her father here, unannounced, while she was caught up in a busy schedule. "Hi, Lila," Victor signed slowly, his hands moving with a kind of effort, as though he had practiced what he was about to say, but wasn't sure if he'd get it right. "I wanted to see you, to spend some time together." Lila stood still for a moment, looking at her father, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Perhaps guilt, perhaps surprise at the emotion in his face. She looked away for a brief second, maybe collecting her thoughts before she responded. "I've been so busy," she said, her voice trailing off. "You know how it is. I didn't expect you to come by today." Victor nodded, clearly understanding the reason behind her words, but I could see the disappointment settle into his posture, even though he tried to hide it. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. They had been apart for so long, and now they were standing here, the gap between them so wide that it almost seemed insurmountable. But something shifted in the air. I could sense it, a subtle change, as though the tension had been building for a long time, and now it was ready to break. I didn't know if it was the kindness I had shown Victor or the fact that he had come all this way to see his daughter, but for the first time since I'd met Lila, I saw her soften. "Come on," Lila said finally, breaking the silence. "Let's grab some lunch. I know a good place just around the corner." She turned to me, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. "Thank you for looking after him," she said, her voice sincere, but still holding a professional edge. "I didn't realize he was here, or that you two had been talking." "It was my pleasure," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'm glad I could help." Victor's face lit up at Lila's invitation, and for the first time in what must have been years, I saw the father-daughter bond I had heard so much about. The way he smiled at her, the way he reached out to take her hand in his, said more than words ever could. It was a simple gesture, one that most families might take for granted, but for Victor, it was the world. As we left the office together, heading toward the restaurant Lila had mentioned, I couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. I had watched a father and daughter reconnect after what felt like a lifetime of emotional distance. And in a strange way, I had been the catalyst for that change. I had stepped in when I saw Victor struggling, not just because I had the ability to help with sign language, but because something in me knew that he deserved to be seen, just like anyone else. It was the smallest thing I could do, yet it had made such a profound difference in his day and in his relationship with his daughter. At the restaurant, the conversation flowed more easily than I expected. There was still a little awkwardness, of course. The space between Victor and Lila wasn't going to be closed in a single meal, but there was something different now. Victor was no longer the disappointed, overlooked father waiting in the lobby of the office building. He was someone who had found his way back into his daughter's life, even if just for a brief moment. And Lila, for all her busy schedule and professional detachment, seemed to be letting her guard down, just a little. They talked about old times, about the houses Victor had built, and the way they used to spend summers together before Lila's career took off. There was a softness in their voices as they reminisced, a shared history that wasn't entirely lost, even if it had been pushed aside by the demands of life. As I listened, I realized how easy it is to take the people we love for granted, how often we get wrapped up in our own worlds and forget to make time for the people who matter most. For the rest of the afternoon, I stayed quietly in the background, listening more than speaking, watching as Lila and Victor reconnected, bit by bit. I felt like an outsider in their moment, but I didn't mind. In a way, I was part of something bigger than myself. I had witnessed the power of empathy, of showing up for someone when they needed it most. It wasn't about doing something grand or dramatic. It was about seeing someone for who they truly were, about giving them the space to be seen and heard. By the end of the lunch, when Victor and Lila stood up to leave, there was a sense of closure in the air. Not that everything was perfect, or that the distance between them had disappeared, but there was a quiet understanding, an acknowledgement that they still had time to repair what had been broken, to rebuild their relationship. And for me, that was enough. As we parted ways outside the restaurant, Victor shook my hand warmly and signed, "Thank you, Emily. You gave me more than just a tour today." Lila smiled at me, her expression genuine. "Thank you for helping him," she said again, and this time it felt like she really meant it. "You've done more for our family than you know." And just like that, I realized how powerful small gestures can be, how taking the time to notice someone, to reach out, can change the course of their day or even their life. The next few days at the office were a blur. I kept replaying the moments from lunch in my mind. Victor's smile, the quiet way he'd held Lila's hand, and the softening in both of their expressions as they finally found their way back to each other. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't the dramatic, tearful reunion that I might have expected from a movie. But it was real, and I felt deeply privileged to have witnessed it. As the days passed, life at the office settled back into its usual rhythm. But something had changed, at least for me. The small, seemingly insignificant act of helping Victor had started to feel like a turning point in my own life, a moment of clarity that I hadn't realized I needed. I had spent so much of my time keeping my head down, just doing my job, afraid to step out of my comfort zone. But helping Victor, really helping him, had awakened something in me, a desire to be more present, to do more than just exist in the background. It wasn't just about the connection I had made with Victor, though that had been deeply rewarding. It was about realizing that I had the ability to make a difference, to bring people together, to create moments of genuine connection in a world that often felt so detached and busy. I had always been an observer, quietly watching life go by, but after everything that had happened, I felt like I could do more than just observe. I could act. I could help. The change didn't go unnoticed. Lila, who had been so focused on her work, approached me a few days after lunch with her father. "Emily," she said, her voice still professional but carrying a hint of warmth, "can we talk for a minute?" I nodded, my heart picking up pace, unsure of what to expect. Had I done something wrong? I had barely seen her around the office since the lunch, so I didn't know if she was just checking in or if something else was on her mind. She led me to a quiet meeting room, and I could see a glimmer of something in her eyes, something beyond just the usual business facade. "I've been thinking," she started, her hands clasped in front of her, "about the way you handled things with my father. And honestly, I'm impressed. I didn't expect it." I blinked, surprised. "I just helped him with a few things," I said, unsure where this conversation was headed. "It wasn't a big deal." Lila shook her head. "No, it was a big deal. You stepped up when no one else did. You made him feel seen, and more importantly, you made me realize something." She paused, as though weighing her next words. "I've been so focused on my career, on building this company, that I've lost sight of what really matters. My father came here, hoping to see me, and I didn't make time for him. I don't want to make that mistake again." Her words hit me harder than I expected. They weren't just about her relationship with her father. They were about something bigger, the way we all get caught up in our lives, our work, and forget to value the people who matter most. It was a harsh reminder of how easy it is to take people for granted. Lila continued, "I've been thinking a lot about the company and where we're going, especially when it comes to creating a more inclusive, welcoming environment. And I want you to be part of that change. I know you're just an assistant, but I've seen something in you, Emily. Something I didn't expect. You've got the ability to make people feel valued, to help them feel included." My heart was racing. I hadn't expected this. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lila's eyes softened. "I want you to take on a new role here, something bigger than just your current position. I've been talking to the leadership team about creating a director of diversity and inclusion role, and I think you're the perfect person for it." I was stunned into silence. The room felt like it was closing in around me, and I had to take a moment to process her words. Me? A director? It didn't seem real. I had never seen myself as someone who could take on such a responsibility. I was still figuring things out, still trying to find my place at the company. But Lila was looking at me with such sincerity that I couldn't deny it. There was something in her words that resonated deeply with me. "You'd be in charge of making sure everyone here feels like they belong," Lila continued. "You'd help implement policies that make the workplace more inclusive, not just for clients, but for employees too. We'd work together to create programs, bring in new ideas, and make sure our company culture reflects our values." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The role seemed so far removed from where I started, from the person I used to be, the quiet assistant who barely spoke up. But as Lila spoke, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about a job, it was about making a real impact. It was about creating a culture that valued empathy, inclusion, and connection. I I don't know if I'm ready for something like that, I said, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. I don't have the experience or qualifications. I'm just an assistant. Lila smiled. You have something more important than qualifications. You have the ability to see people for who they truly are. You've already shown that. This isn't about technical skills, it's about heart. And you've got plenty of that. Her words were like a light breaking through the fog. I realized that this was exactly what I had been searching for. I didn't just want to be an invisible cog in the machine. I wanted to make a difference, to help build something better. And now, for the first time in my life, I could see a path forward. It wasn't going to be easy, and I was terrified, but I knew that I couldn't pass up the opportunity to step up and lead. I'll do it, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll take the role. Lila's smile widened, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Good. I knew you would. Let's get to work. As I left the meeting room, my mind was spinning. I couldn't believe what had just happened, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly where I was meant to be. I had come from a place of being invisible, unsure of my worth, to standing on the edge of something bigger than myself. And I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head on. The next few days were a whirlwind. Lila's offer had shaken me to my core, and now, with the weight of my new role settling on my shoulders, I felt both excited and terrified. I had always prided myself on being someone who kept a low profile, someone who stayed out of the spotlight. But this was different. This wasn't about staying in the background anymore. This was about stepping up and making a real change. I spent my first few days researching everything I could about diversity and inclusion programs. I read about workplace accessibility, training programs, and ways to foster an inclusive culture. The more I learned, the more I realized how much work still needed to be done. While the company had good intentions, it was clear that we were far from being truly inclusive. There were no formal policies in place, and many of the employees hadn't had any training on how to engage with people from different backgrounds or with disabilities. This role wasn't just about making sure everyone felt welcome. It was about building a foundation that would sustain that feeling long term. I was both overwhelmed and determined. The first thing I did was meet with the leadership team. It was a little intimidating, sitting in that room with people who had far more experience than I did, but I knew that I had to make my voice heard. I explained my vision for the role, emphasizing the importance of creating an environment where everyone felt valued, not just as employees, but as individuals. I proposed a few ideas for starting with small changes, implementing mandatory inclusion training for all staff, making sure our office environment was accessible to people with disabilities, and creating a space where employees could share feedback on how to improve company culture. The meeting was nerve-wracking, but by the end of it, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Lila was supportive as always, and the leadership team seemed intrigued by my ideas. They didn't immediately dismiss me because I was young and had little formal experience. They listened. That meant everything to me. Once the ball was rolling, the next step was to begin the actual work. My first task was to create an inclusion training program. I spent hours compiling resources, reaching out to experts in the field, and developing a curriculum that would resonate with everyone in the company. It had to be engaging, not just a dry, obligatory session that employees would forget about by the next day. I wanted it to be something that would spark real conversation, make people reflect on their biases, and challenge them to do better. It was a huge task, and there were moments when I doubted myself. Could I really pull this off? Would anyone take me seriously? I remember sitting at my desk one afternoon, staring at my computer screen, feeling the weight of it all. I had always played it safe, avoided risks, and stayed within my comfort zone. But now, I was being asked to lead something that could change the company's entire culture. The pressure was immense. I was just an assistant a few weeks ago, someone who kept her head down and did her job. Now, I had to be a leader. It was terrifying. But then I remembered Victor. I remembered how much his visit had meant to him, how much he had longed to be seen, to be acknowledged. And I realized that this wasn't just about making the company better. It was about creating an environment where people like Victor could feel like they mattered, where everyone, regardless of their background, their abilities, or their role, could walk into work every day and know that they were valued. That thought gave me the strength to push through the fear. As the weeks went by, I worked tirelessly to build out the program. I collaborated with HR to develop policies that would make our hiring processes more inclusive, ensuring that we weren't overlooking qualified candidates because of unconscious biases. I worked with the design team to make sure our office space was accessible to people with mobility challenges. I reached out to local organizations to partner with them and learn how we could better support employees with disabilities. The changes weren't drastic yet, but they were important. They were small steps in the right direction. But the real turning point came when I sat down with a group of employees for a focus group session. I wanted to hear their thoughts on the company culture, what was working, what wasn't, and what we could improve. I expected some basic feedback, maybe a few suggestions on how to make things better. What I didn't expect was the depth of emotion that came pouring out. People shared stories of feeling overlooked or dismissed, of not having their voices heard in meetings, of being passed over for promotions because of unconscious biases. It was eye-opening and heartbreaking. I had known intellectually that we had room to improve, but hearing these stories firsthand was a wake-up call. It was one thing to read about diversity and inclusion. It was another to hear it from the people who lived it every day. In that moment, I realized how much more work there was to do. It wasn't just about policies or programs. It was about changing the mindset of the entire company, about making inclusion a core part of who we were, not just a set of guidelines on a piece of paper. That focus group session changed everything for me. It reminded me of why I had taken on this role in the first place. I wasn't just doing this for the company's bottom line or to check off boxes. I was doing it because people deserved to be seen, heard, and valued. It wasn't enough to make a few changes and call it a day. We needed to create a culture where everyone, from the CEO to the newest intern, felt like they had a voice. That was my mission, and I was determined to see it through. A few months into my role, I began to see the shift I had hoped for. The training programs were well received, and employees were starting to talk more openly about inclusion. People were actively participating in the discussions, challenging their own biases, and looking for ways to make the company more accessible. It wasn't perfect, and we still had a long way to go, but I could feel the momentum building. I was no longer just an assistant. I was a leader in shaping our company's culture. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As the months went by, I found myself settling into my new role as the Director of Diversity and Inclusion. The weight of the responsibility no longer felt so overwhelming, but it was still something I took seriously every single day. The changes we were implementing weren't always easy, but they were necessary, and I could see the positive impact they were starting to have. Employees were more engaged in conversations about inclusion. HR was taking the new hiring policies seriously, and we were getting feedback from people who felt more seen and heard than they ever had before. But despite all the progress, there were still days when I questioned myself, when I wondered if I was really making a difference, or if I was just spinning my wheels, trying to push something that wasn't going to change fast enough. One afternoon, as I was sitting at my desk reviewing the latest feedback from our company-wide inclusion survey, I received an unexpected email from Lila. It was short and to the point. "Let's meet. I have an idea I want to discuss with you. 3 p.m. in my office." I didn't know what to expect, but my heart started racing anyway. What could she possibly want to talk about? Had I done something wrong? Was I not meeting her expectations? I quickly glanced through my calendar. Nothing urgent, nothing that could have triggered this meeting. I grabbed my notebook, took a deep breath, and headed toward her office. As I walked into the sleek, modern space where she worked, I could feel my nerves starting to rise. I had gotten used to the idea of leading diversity initiatives, but I hadn't gotten used to the pressure of answering to someone like Lila. She was sharp, driven, and had high standards. Everything I did to live up to those standards. Lila looked up from her desk as I entered, and her eyes softened for just a moment. Emily, come in. Close the door, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. As I sat down, I noticed she had a folder in front of her, and it was filled with charts and data. I knew that wasn't good. I wasn't a fan of numbers or statistics, but I had a feeling this was going to be important. She leaned forward and pushed the folder toward me. We've been gathering data on employee satisfaction and company culture for the past several months, and the results are clear, she began. Our diversity and inclusion initiatives are making an impact, but there's still a lot of work to do. The feedback we've gotten is overwhelmingly positive, but there's one area where we're falling short, and it's one that we can't ignore. I felt a knot form in my stomach. What area? I asked, my voice shaky. Lila took a deep breath and opened the folder, revealing a chart filled with percentages. It's the leadership team. While employees across the board are feeling more included and heard, there's a significant gap when it comes to leadership representation. We're still missing diverse voices at the highest levels of the company, and that's something we need to address. I nodded, absorbing what she was saying. I had known that this would be a challenge. Getting more diverse individuals into leadership roles was one of the hardest parts of any inclusion program. But hearing it laid out so plainly in front of me hit harder than I expected. I hadn't realized just how much more needed to be done. It wasn't just about making policies or conducting training. It was about changing the face of leadership, about getting people from underrepresented backgrounds into decision-making positions. I understand, I said quietly, feeling a mix of frustration and determination. So, what's the next step? How do we get there? Lila smiled slightly. That's where you come in, Emily. You've shown that you can lead and make change happen. I want you to help us build a leadership pipeline that will elevate diverse talent to the top. You've already laid the groundwork with the employees, and now it's time to focus on leadership development. I want you to create a mentorship program specifically designed to support diverse individuals who show leadership potential. We need to not only recruit diverse candidates, but also empower them and give them the tools they need to rise through the ranks. The weight of her words settled over me. This was no longer about just making people feel included. It was about transforming the company from the inside out. It was about making sure that the diversity we had started to build at the ground level was represented in the highest echelons of the company. And it wasn't going to be easy. It would take time, patience, and a lot of strategic planning. But I felt something shift inside me. This was the next challenge I had been waiting for. This was the work that truly mattered. I'll do it, I said firmly. I'll build the program. Lila gave me a nod of approval, her eyes showing a rare glimmer of admiration. I knew you would. We'll give you all the resources you need. You've earned the trust of the company, Emily. I believe in you. As I left her office, my heart was racing. I had just been handed a monumental responsibility, one that could reshape the entire company. But for the first time since I started this journey, I didn't feel scared. I felt ready. I had come from a place of invisibility, from hiding in the background, to being asked to take charge of something that could change the course of our company's future. It was a daunting task, but I knew I was the right person for it. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the project. I reached out to people I trusted for guidance, spoke with mentors and colleagues who had experience in leadership development, and designed a mentorship program that would focus on identifying and nurturing leadership potential in diverse employees. I worked with HR to ensure that the program was structured in a way that would provide real opportunities for advancement, not just theoretical ones. It wasn't just about talking the talk. It was about walking the walk. As the program began to take shape, I started to see the possibilities. I could already imagine a future where our leadership team looked more like the diverse workforce that had helped us get where we were today. It was going to be a long road, but for the first time, I felt certain that we could make it happen. And as I worked on the program, I couldn't help but think back to that moment in the lobby, when I first helped Victor and he smiled at me like I had just given him the world. I realized that, in a way, Helping him that day had led me to this very moment. I had learned that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the course of someone's life. And in this case, perhaps, even the course of an entire company. As the months passed, the mentorship program began to take shape. The initial steps were slow, and the process was more challenging than I had anticipated. Building a leadership pipeline was never going to be quick, and the moments when I doubted myself crept in often. There were times when I looked around and felt the weight of the task ahead, wondering if we would ever get to where we wanted to be. But despite the challenges, there was a growing sense of purpose in everything I did. I was no longer just an assistant in the background. I had a vision, and now I had a responsibility to see it through. The first group of mentors and mentees was carefully selected. We had to ensure that we weren't just filling slots, but that each pairing made sense. I spent hours interviewing potential mentees, asking about their career goals, their experiences, and what kind of support they needed. I also reached out to senior leaders who had the time and willingness to mentor. I knew this wasn't just about giving these individuals a seat at the table. It was about helping them find their voice, to become leaders in their own right. It was about providing the tools they needed to succeed in a world where too often their voices were drowned out. It wasn't easy, but the more I got involved, the more I saw the potential in the employees who had previously been overlooked. There was so much talent, so much drive, waiting to be nurtured. I started meeting with the mentors regularly to make sure the relationships were developing in the right way. I wanted this program to be more than just a tick on a checklist. It had to be genuine. One of the mentees, Maya, stood out to me early on. She was a junior project manager who had been with the company for over 2 years, but she had never felt like she had a clear path forward. When we spoke, I could hear the ambition in her voice, but I also saw the hesitation. She had so much potential, but it was as if she didn't quite believe in herself. I asked her about her career goals, and she mentioned wanting to move into a leadership role, but not knowing how to navigate the company's politics. "I'm just not sure if they'll ever take me seriously," Maya admitted during our first meeting. "There's a lot of talk about diversity, but when it comes to real decision-making roles, I don't see people who look like me. I don't know if I have what it takes to break through." Her words hit me hard. I knew exactly what she meant. I had felt the same way at the beginning of my own career. The fear that, despite all the hard work, you might never be seen as more than just an assistant or an employee who wasn't quite ready for the bigger roles. But I also knew that self-doubt was often the biggest barrier to progress. If I could help Maya see that she already had what it took, if I could show her how to build the confidence she needed, then maybe I could help her break through. We set up regular mentoring sessions, and I introduced her to some of the senior leaders who were part of the program. Slowly, Maya started to come out of her shell. She gained more confidence in meetings, started speaking up with new ideas, and was even given a chance to lead a smaller project. The change wasn't overnight, but it was noticeable. The transformation in her was one of the most rewarding experiences I had in the program. Watching Maya take ownership of her career and embrace her potential was a clear reminder of why I was doing this work. Mentorship was more than just guiding people through their job roles. It was about helping them find their own strength. As we moved forward with the program, I began to see a subtle shift in the company. More employees were stepping up to take on leadership roles, and our leadership team was slowly starting to reflect the diversity that we had worked so hard to cultivate at every level. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Small wins were turning into bigger wins, and the impact of our work was becoming more apparent. But there was one moment, one conversation that truly solidified the importance of the mentorship program for me. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up a meeting with some of the other directors, Lila came into the room with a smile that I had come to recognize. She was holding an envelope in her hand, and I could tell something big was happening. "Emily, I've got some news for you," she said, her eyes gleaming. "We've decided to promote Maya to senior project manager." I could feel the pride swell in my chest. Maya had done it. All of the hard work, the doubts, and the struggles had paid off. She had made it to the next level, and it wasn't just because of the title or the salary bump. It was because she had finally found the belief in herself that she had been missing. I couldn't have been prouder of her. And I knew that this wasn't just a win for Maya, it was a win for the entire company. The mentorship program had played a role in that success, but Maya's dedication and growth were what had gotten her there. Lila handed me the envelope, and I saw that it was a company-wide recognition certificate. "We're going to announce this next week," Leela continued. "I want you to be the one to present it to Maya. You've done incredible work, Emily, and it's made a real difference." I felt a lump in my throat as I looked at Leela. "Thank you," I said, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't just the promotion that mattered. It was the realization that, somehow, we had started to shift the culture of the company. We had started to create a space where people could feel empowered to take risks, to step up, and to be seen. The mentorship program had become more than just an initiative. It had become a movement, a living, breathing part of the company's DNA. As I left Lila's office, holding the envelope, I felt a sense of pride and fulfillment that I had never experienced before. The journey wasn't over, but this moment felt like a milestone. It was proof that the work we were doing mattered. It was proof that change was possible. And it was proof that sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you, to help you unlock your potential. In life, don't be afraid to step out of the shadows and take risks. Small acts of kindness can create profound changes, not only in the lives of others, but in your own as well. Never underestimate the power of truly seeing people for who they are, and always make time for those who matter most. Growth comes from embracing your own potential and helping others discover theirs. Be open to change, even when it feels uncomfortable. The journey may not always be easy, but the rewards, connection, impact, and the realization of your own strength are worth every step. Keep believing in yourself and in others.